former Intel engineer. I spent 11 years at Intel, half of it in microprocessor development, the other half as an engineer, being trained to be a patent attorney, and I prosecuted patents for 5 years for Intel. And then I went on my own, and for the most part I've been working with startup companies, helping them patent their inventions. I also do trademarks as well.
Hello, I'm Alec Rivers. As mentioned, I'm a co-founder of Shaper Tools. Shaper Tools makes a handheld CNC machine. So it's a digital power tool.
Yeah, I think it was on actually.
Oh, let's see if I can figure this out. Shaper was based on my PhD research at MIT, which I completed 8 years ago, and so I can talk about what it's like being a very sort of technically oriented co-founder. I definitely, many times over the journey, felt like when you see somebody walking a dog that's too big for them, getting pulled down the street, like that was me with the startups. I was not a born entrepreneur, so I can, share my war stories about that. Then late last year, Shaper Tools was acquired by a large power tool manufacturer called Festool. They're not so well known in America, but they're very well known in Europe. So I've seen the whole sort of journey now, and I can talk about that and about sort of hard tech startups, and also IP, if maybe an overlap with Alex, because of my connection with MIT, there were some IP entanglements with universities. I'll leave it up.
Hi, I'm Kelly Coyne. As mentioned before, I'm the founder of Grit Ventures. We are a venture capitalist firm that specializes in extremely early stage robotics and artificial intelligence. But I've only been doing that for a few years, and prior to that I spent my entire career more on your side of the table, extremely early stage, 5 people and under, startups that specialize in deep tech and hardware. For them, I was generally doing all of the go-to-market. That's how I define it. So marketing, PR, sales, customer support, and the thing that I am actually the most proud of in my entire career, even beyond my venture capital firm, is the work that I did in creating beta testing programs and pilot programs for deep tech robotics and hardware startups. And so that's how I got involved in Hardware Massive, actually long before Grit Ventures even.
Hi everybody, my name is Anne Coquette. I'm the founder of The Guild, which is a global community for women to connect, learn, and grow together. We started this 3 years ago here in San Francisco and started building our community of investors, entrepreneurs, and innovators here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, and are now bringing the Silicon Valley magic to our global community of female entrepreneurs. And as you can hear, I'm not from here, so my background is actually, I grew up a stone throw from Festool. So that's how small the world is. In Germany, near Stuttgart, and I did a lot of IT consulting, then came here 7 years ago, started a consumer product company together with my husband, and ran that startup for 3 years, and then sold the company. And that really led me to love entrepreneurship and startups. And I brought that spirit to Genentech, and their innovation team looked at a lot of digital diagnostic tools, medtech companies, and I have the biggest I love you guys who are doing this, because I think it's so incredible to save lives and do it with hardware and software and compliance. And so now I'm doing The Guild for 3 years. I love mentoring startups, advising, brainstorming with you, and I also know a lot of people in the hardware community. So if you have a startup or an idea, you want to bring it to the world, feel free to connect with me.
Thanks. So let's get started. The first topic I want to talk about is building a right team and engaging with the community. I feel like we hear a lot about the right team being one of the biggest pieces of a successful startup. And what do you think is the most important in building your founding team, like the first founding members of that team, and maybe what is there anything that you've heard that people think is important but maybe isn't?
Absolutely. So I have a few startups on my back, and one I started with my husband. And so, we were very like-minded, and that can be great, but that can also be a pitfall. So I think looking at your founding team is important when you also look at your product. So what's the product you're creating, and is it a product that's just for one part of the population, or is it a product that's for men and women or underrepresented groups? And then thinking that through and building a team that represents that consumer group that you want to serve is really key early on. That sounds easier than it's done because you probably don't have those people in your network, but there's a lot of different tools you can use and networks that you can tap into to find those people. And yes, I think it's very important to have co-founders at the beginning that you know very well, that you trust, that you go through thick and thin with. But then when you start hiring your salespeople, your CFOs, et cetera, start thinking about building diverse teams, and then building a community around your startup that represents the community that will buy your product, and start testing with that community early on, so that you don't run into these issues and challenges at some point where all of a sudden you realize that half the population can't use your tool because you just haven't thought about it.
Alec, I'd like to get your input on this, because as a technical founder, and I know you're a woodworking enthusiast as well. You sort of were your market. You represented your market, right? So for you, and you also mentioned not really being a born entrepreneur. What was it that you needed, that you felt made your team successful as you put together your founding team?
Well, that's obviously a huge topic. I would like, I could say a few things to that. I think, you said like I'm a woodworking enthusiast, and how did that impact the team? Well, I definitely know that having a product you're passionate about is really helpful, because it's the only weapon you have when you're out there trying to recruit people to help you is that shared passion. And my joke always when we're pitching people to come work for Shaper is hiring, by the way, and this is my great pitch. I say, yes, you're going to have to work more than you would at a big company like Google or Facebook, but we also pay less. And yet we recruited 25 people, right? So how did we do that? And the only way was that we had a product that really got people's juices flowing. About growing the team, though, I did want to share one quick story, which is I found my co-founder back when I was still at MIT, and I found him by dragging my prototype to every professor who would take the time to talk to me, and saying, here's this thing, is there anyone I should work with? And I got a few different leads, but the one who I ended up wanting to work with, and who did become my co-founder, a guy named Alon Moyer, was the one where the professor said, this guy's really sharp, but also he's a super decent human being and totally honorable, and you can trust him always. And that is, I think, that part of the endorsement was more important than the former part, which is like he's technically good. Because for a co-founder, it's not like an employee. Like an employee both can be fired and can choose to quit. But a co-founder is more like a spouse, you can't walk away from that relationship, like as much as you might want to at some points. And so, treat it like that, and not just find somebody who is that, you think you could get married to, in a sense, but also have a lot of humility or understanding for them when you're in the tough times, because there will definitely be tough times. Knowing that you might be thinking, gosh, if this were any other employee, I would just fire them. And they might be thinking, gosh, if this were any other job, I would just quit right now. And then you both hold on to that resentment and blame the other person, but you can't fire them, and they can't quit. And so it's pointless to remind yourself that you would fire them, or they would quit, or whatever, because you can't. So, have that humility to work through everything, because you have to. And by the way, that is mostly an abstract point. Me and Alon have gotten along really well. He's an amazing guy. So, there have always been tough times, but
Kelly, you have something?
Yeah, I wanted to, do I have it on now? No? Yes? Why don't I just take that one?
Yeah, here you go.
Yeah, this one seems to be on. Okay, so I want to start with a story about diversity that I alluded to the rest of the panel that I promised I would tell during this. It's one of the favorite stories I tell people. So when I was at a consumer robotic company, and I was running the beta testing program, amongst other things. But I had a very large beta testing team. And during that time, my husband, I know this will shock you all, my husband and I are early adopters of technology. I'm sure you're all very shocked by this. And so we bought Alexa within the first week. You know Alexa, the Amazon thing? And so at this point, I was running a 100-person team, and my husband set Alexa up to do the lights in our house. However, every day I'd come home to running this very large team and have to ask my husband to ask Alexa to turn off the lights, because Alexa couldn't understand me. And I think this is an important point about diversity on a team, and particularly within testing. What happened was I ended up getting a bunch of people off the Amazon testing team. And they came over, they heard me griping about this one day at lunch. And they said, oh, don't you know? They forgot to include any women on the testing team. And because of that, they forgot to test for the frequency of women's voices. I don't have a particularly high-pitched voice even, right? So, can you imagine? So the point being, when you think about a company as big as Amazon and how big their testing team might be and all the different angles they're thinking of, and they forgot to test for a woman's voice, that is how you need to think about your testing, that there are so many angles that you aren't understanding because of your particular purview. And it's not just women versus men or young versus old. It's actually diversity in disciplines even. You need philosophy majors and psychology majors and all these different people looking at this from all the different angles, particularly when it comes to artificial intelligence. And I think that's the really interesting thing we're seeing as teams develop in this new day and age of deep tech.
Thanks. That's a really great segue into building great products and product development. And I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how do you design a testing program that's really effective and robust? Alec, how much testing did you do along your path of developing your new product?
Yeah, I may not be able to speak at great length about this. We had, fewer than 10 tools for most of the time up until when we shipped. And we did try lending things out for a beta test, but we found out that the overhead involved with getting it to people and bringing it back was so much work. And then when things went wrong, we didn't always have the visibility on it. So we ended up doing most of our testing in-house. We would bring in people and let them use the tool for a while. Occasionally when we lent it out, though, we did get some insights, like somebody had a really messy shop and sawdust was getting everywhere, and we had to prepare for that. So we didn't do a huge amount of testing.
Did that work out?
Amazingly, yes. Once the team grew to the point that we were getting ready to ship, then we had pros who had done it before, and we were able to leverage their experience with past products and make a really reliable product. Actually, we have I'm not going to quote the percentages, I don't remember, but incredibly low return rates. But sorry, not a great insightful answer.
That's great. Alec?
Yes,
Alex.
I did testing in Intel, microprocessor development, and when you have a specification, you've got to test it to make sure it meets quality standards, and there's also the opportunity Alec was talking about of learning and improving the product from the testing. You can see sensitivities and where you can tweak to improve yields and so on that, without the proper testing, you're going to have to satisfy customers. I don't understand more about the point, except that you need to have a clear idea of what the product is supposed to do and make sure it does it.
Up is on.
That one's more confusing. So the way that I look at this, I'm sure that many of you have masters and PhDs and that you've done a ton of time actually testing in labs and understanding how to do this. But actually testing for consumer readiness is a very different thing. Generally when we test for in our PhD labs, we do what we call the happy path. We assume how things are going to work and we test for that. But the happy path is the exact opposite of how we should test for either consumer or B2B product. So the way that I think about this, and I actually, this is, I think I learned it from an Apple program manager, so I didn't just come up with it. But essentially, the way that you need to do it is you need to start at your use case. You break down your use case into the absolute smallest grains of sand that you can. On each of those grains of sand, let's say that you're saying a flying robot, okay? So a flying robot, you say the flying robot needs to fly no more, the flying robot's gonna follow you. That's your use case. The flying robot, then you start breaking it down. The flying robot needs to go no more than 5 feet behind you, no closer than 2 feet towards you. Those are your goals, your end game, where you're going to get before you give it to your consumer. You then break those down into 3 different stages: EVT, DVT, and PVT. Those are your different stages of hardware development. And so each time you reach the metric goal you've given yourself for that stage, that lets you know that you can go to the next stage of hardware development. But the real thing that I see people miss on, and what I see so many hardware companies fail on, is they don't break the use case down into these metrics, align those metrics with gates, and allow those gates to determine their release stage, rather than just saying, I think it's good enough. And so that's really what I think, bringing that programmatic structure is something that is hard to do the first time. You learn it over time, but I think that's the big difference between companies that I see win and companies I see fail.
It's very scary as a founder to do testing because you put your baby out there and you let people criticize it, right? That's what it is. And so
I told you during our prep call, I said, you know the CEO is not allowed in the room during testing, right?
And it's important that you step back, you put a glass between you and your users, and you just observe, and you don't like nudge them and tell them.
When you tell them how to do it, the testing becomes entirely useless.
It does. And we've seen this so many times, and we have one case where we had this little pill adherence bottle that's for lung cancer patients, and lung cancer patients are usually 60 years old and have a lot of other diseases, and guess what? They can't hear the high-pitched noise that the bottle was making. So the entire pilot, which was hundreds of thousands of dollars, failed because of that piece. And so think about it. If you had just gone to patients before, really understood who they were, talk to your grandma, grandpa, and talk to them without even having the product there, you would have already probably put a lot of things in your requirement specifications that you then need to create a perfect or a pretty good product. And we see it over and over and over because you're so excited about this product, you know the world needs it, you develop it, you put a lot of money into it, and then it falls down right and left. So one advice I have for people who don't have a prototype yet to actually test is to put it out there on the internet, run some Facebook ads, put some features on it, say what it will do, and you will see if there's a target market and what kind of demographic will respond to it. So that's really early days of user testing.
I'm going to switch gears again. That's a great segue into the IP field, right? So let's say in that situation you wanted to, put your idea out there in the public domain. You're early in development. How does timing with getting a provisional patent or with IP work into this process?
Yeah, in the U.S. you have a year from the date you publish an idea, but if you want to file internationally, it has to be absolute, the standard is absolute novelty, generally speaking. And so if you're thinking that you might want patent coverage in Europe or Asia, you definitely want to get that patent filed before you publish it. So if you're doing early discussions, you do things under NDA to extend that period of non-public information and confidentiality as far as possible. And so you want to be careful about publishing like that to get the target market. It depends on what you publish. If it's not the invention that you're publishing, then you're okay. If you're just publishing high-level details, details like, what problem it's going to solve at the highest level that doesn't make the idea obvious, is not enabling of the idea, then that's not a problem. But you definitely want to talk to a patent attorney, I think, before you do that. Does that answer?
So, I think it's become clear now, we all had a prep call before this, so we talked about a lot of these things already. But the one thing I do want to make clear is that even 5 years ago, that slide that you had in your deck for your Series A deck that showed that you had 8 patents pending, 13 patents pending, that was something that would get you funded. Right now, patents are more about protection than actually advancing the company. That slide with all your patents is not going to get you funded. What's going to get you funded is go-to-market traction. So everything you're thinking about right now as an early stage entrepreneur, think about your testing, your MVP, and your pilot program and customer validation. And that's what you really need to be focusing on if you're actually going to get your company out of the angel funding stage and into a very serious, seed and Series A.
Let me bring this back to, sorry. I just wanted to bring this back to IP, and because we haven't heard much from Alex yet.
So I would just say, there is the issue with this attitude that you file a provisional, it doesn't matter what it says, it has very broad plans, high-level disclosure of what you're thinking about doing, and that's somehow going to get you funding. And I think investors are onto that game, and that's not, they're going to want to see the provisional, I would expect, and they're going to see that it really is not, you can technically say patent pending, you've got a patent in the queue, but it matters what's in that patent, and if it's something significant, the technology certainly can drive funding. I mean, go-to-market is important too, but if it's critical technology that you've got a real patent on, that's certainly going to drive funding from somebody that can see that disclosure and say you're probably going to get that issue that's going to protect you in a market, and it's real. And so I would say, that's why I laugh whenever I see Shark Tank and they say, "Do you have a patent?" and they say yes. And they're like, "Oh, okay, good." It's like it depends on what's in the patent application and what it covers and how enforceable and how easy it is to design around. Because sometimes you've got a good idea, but someone can figure out a different way to do it that is almost as good or maybe even better. And so a lot of it takes some detailed analysis to understand what the value of those applications are. And so you want to balance all of these strategic elements. Obviously, you can patent something that's no one wants to buy. So obviously, that's really important to have a go-to-market strategy and proof that customers want to build it. It's one of the saddest things I ever see is inventors that are spending years building something that is, that phrase from the movie, "If you build it, they'll come." They don't always come, and so you want to test it. The lean startup idea is really important. Test it with actual customers, or be one of their target customers, and you have the insight that many don't of what they actually want, like Alec was.
Yeah. So the next thing I wanted to follow up with on that is how do you decide what to pursue a patent on? There's both. I think there's two sides of it, right? There's the what can you get a patent on, what's patentable, but also like what's going to be valuable and why. So what's the thought process there?
It's basically the intersection is can you show this technology is new and not obvious, and that's depends on the context of the situation, what's come before, what prior art, and I recommend a lot of times an inventor gets a prior art search done so that they have the context of what comes before, and they can look at that gap of how they might have, if they advance the prior art, state of the art or not, and what that gap is, and can you make a case that that's not obvious, and then you look at the scope of what you might get out of the patent based on that information and say, is that valuable from a technical point of view? Is it going to be easy to design around? Can we broaden the scope of the claims that are supported by your invention so that people can figure out alternative ways to do what you're doing and achieve the same goal from a technical point of view? And then from a business point of view, it has to be important too. There's sometimes great technology that you'll get the respect of your fellow engineers that say, this was a new and non-obvious way to solve that problem, it's really good, but the customer doesn't care about it. It's just something that only engineers respect, and then vice versa. There's great business technology, but business ideas that customers want, but you can't find a patentable idea in there, and so it really is the intersection of those two things that what you're protecting customers care about, and you can convince the patent office is new and non-obvious. Those are the most valuable, I think, in general. And they're both sliding scales, and you have to decide, what is going to, what your budget is, and how that fits into your strategy. Whether you go for long shots or are conservative with what you file on.
So for our company, we weren't able to get a utilities patent, so we weren't able to patent how it works, but we were able to patent the design, so we got a design patent. Did that help us and get the copycats off the market? No, it didn't. But what it did help us with was it was seen as an asset when we sold the company. It was very important to our buyer that we had this design patent. We would have never fought a lawsuit in this for copycats or anything, but it was important to have it as an asset, and that's something to consider in your patent consideration in general as well. And we also didn't patent it internationally, even though we shipped our product to 18 different countries. And it was just too small of markets for us to actually say it's important for us to patent it there, and we just need to be faster than our competition to outpace them in terms of them copying us and us being faster with our new products.
Alec, I want to hear your story about patent entanglements with MIT.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. I'm not sure it's going to be relevant to a lot of you if you already are out of university, but in our case, it was kind of a weird story. I was actually on an internship for my PhD, and in my PhD, they pay me to come up with ideas, and I'm so busy, sweating bullets at work, oh God, I need an idea, that I wasn't coming up with anything particularly exciting. And then when I took some time off, I had the easiest job in the world, and I had time to take up my hobbies, which involved woodworking, and that's when I had the best idea of all, right? So that was great. So I had the idea, and I realized, this is, potentially a company, and quit my internship, decided to develop a whole prototype before I went back to MIT so that I could say that I had developed the idea independently. I did that, I went back to MIT, and I wanted to finish my degree. I got my professor to agree to switch my PhD subject to be the subject of my invention. And, but then the entanglement comes up with MIT as a technology licensing office. They own all the IP and so on, and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to involve them, even though I didn't have to, because their pitch was, hey, we'll do all the work for patenting your invention, and we'll even help you with networking in return for certain rights. And I said, that's actually a potentially interesting deal. In the end, what I did is I talked to everyone I could, and finally I found somebody who had just quit the TLO, and I wish I could say I bought her a beer and got her to spill the beans, but she spilled the beans on the phone without any alcohol, and she was like, honestly, the TLO, once it gets in your pants, they're going to be in your pants for the rest of your life. That was her analogy, not mine. And, so just don't do it, because it's going to make, they can even take away your right to use the invention if they think you're not commercializing it fast enough. And I said, well, no thanks to that, and so we ended up getting a waiver from MIT saying they had no right to the idea and patented it independently. We did find a company that would do so on deferred expenses. In retrospect, I wish we'd gone with a better IP firm, even if we had to pay up front, as I'm sure you're well aware. Bad lawyers cost more in the long run than the most expensive lawyers can find. So that's my IP entanglement story.
Thanks. So in a couple minutes, I'd like to take questions from the audience. So start thinking about what you might want to ask these guys. But in the meantime, Alex, I wanted to get your thoughts on when is pursuing IP not a good idea? When would, say, open source be a better strategy for your business? Like, what's the trade-off there between proprietary versus open source?
It's hard to generalize, but I love open source. It's an amazing resource that all entrepreneurs have. But sometimes when you need investment, you can't have nobody own it. I mean, the way people put money in, you need for hardware, for patent development, for whatever you need in terms of developing this product and bringing it to market. Who's going to give up money so that the public can own it? I mean, maybe the government, but if that's a big part of your business model, that you need investment, they want a stake of the business, and so that's part of the strategy that you've got to think about when you're coming up with your idea. Some people give the software away for free in open source and then sell consulting services on the side. But you've got to basically think through how that business model is going to work. How are you going to make money? Are you going to make money that's going to grow into a VC fundable business? Or are you trying to make a living as for your family, a smaller business model where that's not important? And that's how I would look at it. Depends on the specifics.
Yeah, so I actually see a large discrepancy here between people that I see coming directly out of university versus people who have their master's or PhD. So generally people that have their PhD and are starting a deep tech company, they've had a lot of time to actually work on home brewing their own code. So I see them they tend to really lean in that direction, that they want to start it from scratch and have it really be in-house theirs. On the other side, university or straight out of university, or people that are a first-time entrepreneur and haven't had funding from a university to spend 5 years spinning on code, I tend to see that they use the more open source to cut off 2 to 3 years of development time. As I mentioned, I specialize in robotics, so I see this most frequently with ROS, the robotic operating system, that can cut off 2 to 3 years of development time. And so people that aren't being funded by a university tend to use that shortcut to get to market faster. And so as you're saying, it's a very personal decision, like what you tend to do. And I've even been in-house in companies where we had that civil war over open source versus homebrew. But I think what it really, in the end, it tends to be people that have government funding, that you've gotten grants, non-dilutive grants that can allow you to spend some time working on the code, are more likely to homebrew than those that are just straight coming out and need to cut off some development time.
All right, so do y'all have any burning questions you'd like to ask these guys? I'm just going to walk around with the mic.
Hi, I have a question to Anne. You mentioned copycats in your company. Did it interfere with the growth of the company? How did you deal with that? And what would you advise for a startup that has a product that might be copied?
So it depends on your market. For us, the market was big enough so that we weren't too worried. But what did end up happening is we had about 4 competitors in the market by the time we sold. And one of them became very aggressive and posted Facebook posts that were directly saying things about our product that weren't true. And that was a moment where I was like, okay, that's enough. And then we went to them and we said, okay, by the way, you're infringing on our design patent, and that shut them down. But, we would have never fought a lawsuit because it would have been too expensive for us. You can always send them a nice cease and desist letter and, start there, or just have a phone conversation with people too. Because sometimes you are these competitors on the internet, you feel like there's bad intent because we had the idea first. It might very well be that they had the idea at the same time. Yeah, you were first to market, so you're right. But there is a lot of this like fear, right? that they're taking your market and that they must have bad intentions. That might not be the case, so I always encourage people to reach out and try with positive intent, or think like that first and then go down the different steps in the route. But Alex, maybe you have
I agree with that, yeah. I agree completely. I mean, I think they're having the same fear about putting the money into the design, defending themselves, so that's why they, didn't want to bother. And I agree especially with your point about not assuming bad intent, because a lot of times they're oblivious to what you're doing and so on. So I think that's all.
Next question? Yeah.
Thanks. I had a question for Alec of Shaper Tools. Did you have trouble towards like the end of the seed stage or pre-A investors kind of convincing them of like meaningful traction metrics compared to say a SaaS company, which seems to be all the rage?
Oh yeah, is the short answer. And Festool was our biggest investor in the company because they didn't need to see traction. Like they took the prototypes and they cut stuff with it, and they're like, I don't know if it'll take a year, 5 years, or 10 years, but they knew that this technology was going to be of huge relevance to their target customers. They didn't really care, what we'd done so far in the market, because it was like, oh, maybe they got the marketing wrong, maybe they haven't worked out the channel. But yeah, for VCs, that was not, they weren't taking a prototype and cutting things in a shop. So we did, is the short answer, and the way that we got around that difficulty is finding an investor who was a strategic investor who really got and understood the product rather than a purely financial investor.
Awesome,
Can I
thanks.
get a piece of advice on this?
So I mentioned before I came on stage that there was one thing that I wanted you all to walk away with before I left, and that is that what you call your round of funding is one of the most important things you can do. It can hurt you or help you. And the worst part about all of this is that what we mean by different rounds of funding has changed even in the last 18 months. So I'm going to do a spiel here, but so pre-seed funding. When you're going after pre-seed funding, what that means is you have a working prototype and you're about to start a pilot program. You've already done some level of customer validation, and you have a customer who's willing to actually do a pilot program with you, paid or unpaid. Seed means that you have pilot programs running. You might have revenue, you might not, but you're looking to convert those to revenue soon. Series A, you have very serious revenue. And I mean very serious, like 20 million, but you have revenue that you can actually go show to a VC. And if you align yourself with those correct titles and know what you're going after, know who to go to, it will make your life infinitely easier as an entrepreneur. And don't try and jump ahead, because there's no point in playing D1 ball when you're really a D2 team. So that is the one thing I want you to walk away from, is really think very carefully before you go out and start fundraising. Think about what stage you're at and align that with what people are expecting to see.
Next question? See, people are very curious. Is that a picture or a... Okay. Well, I have more questions. So,
Okay.
I think we're actually...
Oh wait, we got a question right there.
Yeah, we got one. Great.
What's a piece of advice you took you wish you didn't take in retrospect?
So
Everybody has an opinion, and so take every opinion with a grain of salt, because they're not you, they're not in the market, they're not as close to the customer, to the product and everything else. So always step one, step back before you immediately run and implement it. And investors sometimes have a huge responsibility and role, and they tell you what to do, and then the entrepreneurs run and do it. Again, have your team of advisors ready to answer those questions. And for us, people said you will never be able to sell this company, because that's not how it works. And then we had a wholesale customer, he loved our product. He said, will you develop it for the next generation of iPhones? We said no. He said, what keeps me from copying you? We said, not much, but why don't you buy us? And he bought us, you know, and these things happen in Silicon Valley, and you have to go your own path. That would be my advice. Any other advice?
So I'm not going to be specific here, but at a high level, don't listen to everything your venture capitalists say. They aren't gods, okay? Yeah, I didn't learn that till I moved to the other side of the table. They're just normal people who have the same ideas you all do. So don't listen to everything they say. If what they say makes sense, then do it. But don't feel like just because somebody said something in a board meeting, that then you have to spend the next 6 months executing that. Think critically. You know your company better than anyone else. And remember that.
I guess since we're all on something, I just will say amen to all that. I completely agree. We have gotten some amazingly bad advice over the years. I'm going to single out one, which is an investor, a pretty major investor, told us, you know, I said, how long, you know, can you ship your product in? And we said, well, we think we can ship it in a year. And he said, you should put it online, start pre-selling it, and tell people you'll ship it in 3 months because it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Do you remember what I said when you said this? The first thing I said is, that's an investor who's never dealt with being a year late on a customer delivery.
Yeah, and we didn't do that.
Painful.
And I'm glad that we didn't. Yeah, I'll just say also, like, especially for me as a technical background person, somebody who never saw myself as an entrepreneur, I definitely was. I think at times like, oh, is this what I'm supposed to do? You know? The thing I'm proudest of about all the decisions we made at Shaper is we always used common sense, and we never did something because we thought we were supposed to, but even if it came from advice, we would think it through until we understood all the reasons and we felt like we really had been convinced. So yeah, same that everyone's saying. And also, for hardware startups, by the way, a lot of the rules don't apply. And for really hard tech, you know, like where you have really strong IP and stuff, even more of the rules don't apply too, right? So for people in this room, I think a lot of the advice you read online is not necessarily going to be super germane.
Yeah, along with the VC advice, there's a book called E-Boys, which was written, I think, by a Santa Clara business professor about benchmark capital, who made, I think, some of the most successful VC investments ever. And it's an eye-opening experience about how human and ridiculous some of them got, and these guys made ridiculous amounts of money as well. That's a good book to get kind of a sense of what it's really like to be a VC, I think, which was surprising to me.
Right. I think we're out of time. I'm getting an eye over there. So I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing your knowledge with us and dropping some pearls of wisdom. And with that, we'll wrap this discussion, and you guys can go do the networking that you're here to do.